Welcome back to the Liberty Perspective. I'm Joe Marshall, and then we're going to take this. Going to be part two of the Liberty, or part two of the renewables, solar and wind scam, and the threat, the real threat they represent to our republic, that they pose to our republic, the world collectivism that's intrinsic to them, poses to our republic and our liberty. Anyways, I want to pick up really quick, and we got Minnie P up here. I don't know how long she's going to be ready to, hanging out here. She gets sick of this shit, But anyways, I want to kind of see what we got here. There we go. Yesterday, we're talking about these ISOs in different areas. I wanted to kind of clarify a little bit so you get a little bit of an idea. These different electric grid areas, the country is broken up into different areas that are, we have New York here. New York has its own, they're called independent system operators is what they're called on the grid. I don't know. Texas has its own one. California, the CAISO, Northwest, Southwest, Midwest, ISO or independent system operators, PJM, like I said, it's got Pennsylvania, Ohio, North Carolina, Washington, D.C. Then there's the independent systems operators for the Northeast. So I don't know, Southeast, Midwest, just to give you an idea, when they talk about, where you are in here, and what part of the grid where you live is being considered in the information and the data that's being put out on these articles about how long your solar panel projects and your windmill projects are waiting years after being built, even in some cases, to be connected to the grid. I drove by a bunch of them here in New York yesterday. I had to go into town, so we drove by several of these new projects that have been up in recent years. In all of them, every single one of them, they got 3 or 4 poles, maybe 5 poles coming off the street, coming off where the wires are, or none whatsoever. They're just standing there with nothing connected them to the grid. They come 3 or 4 poles, maybe 5 poles in off the street, and then they got the solar panels, I don't know, a few thousand feet, a quarter mile off the road even, and they don't have nothing. They're not even connected, just waiting. They're just waiting. But there's different times in here that, as I went over in the first part here, you have, you see your grid on one of these 6 grids that doesn't list all the ones in the country, but this article here covered these ones. 9.2 years average waiting time just to get connected to the grid, just as a refresher here. And this California, right, their CAISO, New York, 7.5 years. PJM, which includes, Pennsylvania, Ohio, like I said, North Carolina, Washington, D.C., over 6 years, between 6 and 6.5 years. The Midwest, SSP, and Texas, 4.5 years. And the Northeast, I think they're at the least wait at 4 years. And this is in 2025. This chart was made in 2025. You see it right here. But anyways, guys, I just wanted to kind of bring you up a little bit to give you an idea what they are. I didn't really explain what they were in the first one, and to tell you the truth, I wanted to get that map out there, so I did a little digging and found that map for you. See right here, like the wind, 40 months average, and wait time. The longest wait time is for wind, even though most of the projects are solar. The longest wait times are still wind. And I'm going to get down here to work kind of where we left off. We kind of went down through a lot of the reasons they're going over they've coming up with what they call these clusters things. I know New York just put it out. Other places are putting out. The feds are putting it out. These clusters is one of the things that they're working on to remedy the backlog and the wait times and everything, right? And that doesn't count all the hidden fees that people are being hit with, the billions, hundreds of millions, if not, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, if not billions in dollars in upgrades that they're being mandated before they can even connect to the grid. Hidden costs and many times that they were never told about, right? Right? But a lot of it has to do with the things that are being phased out. The credits and tax credits and programs that are being phased out by Trump's big beautiful bill, so are going to be causing a huge log jam as people scramble, and these companies scramble to try to get on and get pushed on before their phase outs phase out. We went over that a little bit, but then we're just coming into, but why the backlog of the Q connection requests to begin with? Kind of, why did these backlogs come in? Why are they sitting there so long waiting? Kind of went over how they're waiting, but what are some of the things that are, directly causing these long waits? Got many reasons. I got a couple of them here. There's many reasons, right? Here's 4. I came up with 4, basically. 1, the centralized mandatory electrification of everything. I mean, they want to... Meanwhile, while these solar and wind renewables are intermittent at best, they don't put out enough energy they're insufficient. They're insufficient and intermittent. They don't put out the energy that even comes close to what we need, what society needs today, let alone what they're saying we're going to need as things advance, as the centralization of everything advances towards the need for data centers. Huge data centers. I saw somewhere where they said, the kids today, by the time they're 14, have literally hundreds of millions of data points. They have hundreds of millions of data points on each kids. Each of these kids that are coming up through school, when we went to school, they didn't have jack shit on us, right? Except for paper records of what tests we took or whatever. But as a centralized society goes and continues towards, as I've talked about on other shows, as the world socialism, world collectivism advances, okay, and its ultimate objective of a single global human organism, which I've kind of talked about on other shows too. As we advance towards that objective of a world collective hive mind, they say that, whatever, but a single global human organism, the centralization of everything is going to need data on everybody. And this isn't really anything new. It goes back to Plato. I mean, read Plato's Republic, and in there, that's the ultimate collectivist utopian society where they're talking about, is they try to figure out what justice is, right? Or what the justice is, or what is just or what isn't just. It doesn't happen before law, before man-made law, eliminating the elimination of God's law or natural law right there, right? But as society evolves towards that single global human organism, they're going to need more control over everybody. And as they did in Plato's Republic, they pick out who was going to be the police, who were going to be the protectors, who were going to be the garbage men, who were going to be the scientists, who were going to be the philosophers, who were going to be whatever, in every teachers, who were going to be, the janitors, who's going to be the farmers, who's going to be the factory, whatever aspect of society that the planners are going to need to fill. It's not going to be like when we grew up. Well, what do you want to be when you grow up? Where you're going to have the freedom to kind of decide what you are. There's going to come a time when everything is going to be centrally planned. Society's central planners are going to have needs to keep the single global human organism running at optimum, proficiency, at least amount of cost, right? So everybody becomes red ink. To mitigate the red ink that every one of us is going to have in that kind of a society, you have to be able to be put where you're going to best serve the collective. They're going to appoint you. It goes back to Auguste Comte. I've talked about him before in a centralized division of labor. It all comes together. What I'm trying to say is that all this stuff is a threat to our liberty, from the world collectivism and world socialism and collectivism of any kind, ultimately, because they're all the same collectivism. Doesn't matter. Communism, nationalism, national socialism, world socialism, humanism, and in many cases, anarchism is most all anarchism is collectivist in nature. It's all the same collectivism. All has the ultimate same end, whether they might dispute amongst each other. All the world's philosophies, I don't know, in my observation anyway, kind of boil down to two. They boil down to two: individualism and collectivism. Our founding principles are of individualism. They come from individualism. Everything else is collectivism. And your philosophy either enables or threatens the ability for a free society to exist, for its even existence. So that's the world boils down to two philosophies. That's kind of where I'm coming from a little bit, from our founding principles perspective, a liberty perspective, and I put the challenge out there to to just consider it. I don't know. That's how I see it, anyways. But it all ties into this. It all ties into this climate change shit. It ties into the whole COVID, protocol, centralization of medicine, centralization of law enforcement and criminal justice reform, ties into these windmills and solar panels. It does. I hope you can see it. But the backlog is where we're getting into. The backlog here is why the backlog, the Q connections to begin with. 4 reasons. There's many, but here's 4. Right. The centralization, mandatory electrification of everything. In New York State, they're even making gas stoves illegal. They want everything electric, and all these smart meters out there. The smart meters, they're clocking us. They're clocking us in the energy that we use in real time. So the minute you plug a toaster in and use it, they know. So that maybe they can start charging us for optimal times, the most demand times. They'll charge you if you're using it at certain times a day, because that's when most times is, as an incentive to not plug your toaster in or not make toast. Whatever. But anyways, a couple stories on this electrification of everything that I came across. One of them, school buses. I mean, they're mandating the electrification of school buses. I don't know if anybody's seen the stories coming in from around the world where these buses are catching on fire. Not just school buses, but city buses and electric vehicles everywhere just catching on fire because of these batteries. And once they start on fire, there's whole ships that have come into port they won't let into port. They're just leaving out the ocean with these batteries on them. They start on fire, they just leave them out there to burn because you can't put them out. You put them in water, and they burn so hot they break up the oxygen. They separate the oxygen from the hydrogen in water and add fuel to the fire and just make it burn hotter. So as soon as you put water on, it's like putting gas on fire, but even worse, even at a molecular level, right? But anyways, they got the electrification of school buses. I got this story. This is from January 2025. And believe it or not, right? They said the road gets bumpy, and they're saying that in New York in 2022, school districts they barred from purchasing gasoline. New York State in 22 told school districts that they're barred from purchasing gasoline or diesel-powered school buses after 2027. That's just 2 years from now. And instead have to buy electric buses at more than double the upfront cost. The other thing that we're keeping track of, or when I'm kind of putting it out there for you to try and keep note of as we're going down through these things is the exponential amount of money that they're spending. They're literally spending us into oblivion, and that's what the Keynesian economic system was designed to do. This is Keynesian economics coming to fruition. This is the world socialism of Keynesian economics coming to fruition. The ultimate destruction of our free society by undermining our currency, the American dollar. So many people bought into it, like, hey, why not be able to spend money? And when you get really, really, really bad in debt, just spend more money to get really, really, really bad in debt so we can spend more money, man. Don't worry about paying nothing back. That word austerity, where you pay your bills, man, don't worry about that. I mean, try mentioning the word austerity in Europe. Mention the word austerity in Europe, man, the place burns down. I mean, they literally set that whole continent on fire over there every time somebody mentions the word austerity, which is just paying your bills. Just keep track of how much money is being spent to make all these freaking net zero policies and these renewable policies and these zero emission policies, which is, it takes huge money, and they don't care. They don't care how much money of your money. Well, it's not even really our money. They're just printing it in thin air. It's to the point where it's impossible. We can't pay it back. Our next probably 5 to 10 generations, I don't know how many. It's intergenerational debt. It can't be paid back. They're literally just printing it out of thin air. It can't be paid back, which also puts the taxpayers, as taxpayers, we used to be able to keep government in check. Well, I'm a taxpayer, and I should, I got a say in what goes on around here. Well, we really don't anymore. The taxpayer's voice has been basically eliminated because they're spending more money than the taxpayer couldn't even pay a fraction of back. The taxpayer has been, the concept of the taxpayer having any say in anything has basically been eliminated from the equation. We've been eliminated from the equation. It's part of that's how much money they're spending. But anyways, these school buses are at double the cost of regular school buses. I got a little chart right here where you can see the dark blue is the old diesel, the small model buses, medium, middle-sized buses, and then the larger regular-sized school buses were over here, what used to be regular, 65, 70 students or whatever. The cost of the electric buses is the light blue up here. Diesel, gas buses was down here, double the cost. You're talking $250,000 more each in that area somewhere, right? That premium alone, that's added, the added cost of buying electric buses instead of replacing them is on track to total more than $9 billion. Now, this $9 billion by 2035, when the state law requires districts to park the last fuel burning units. Some districts face costs in the tens of millions of dollars, as they contemplate necessary substation upgrades and additional upgraded distribution lines, and since or potentially relocating their buses, all these different added expenses to this mandate that they're not even throwing in to the cost of the renewables and the cost of this whole program. When they try to tell us that electric and solar is cheaper, and that their programs, these progressive programs, are cheaper, progressive left or right. And since distribution level upgrades must be planned and approved by the state utility regulators years in advance, school districts will likely need to keep buying gas and diesel buses long after 2027. And the other thing is, keep in mind that we've already gone over the years-long, if not decade-long wait that some of these projects are waiting to get connected to the grid. This is just adding to that. Years-long. They have to be planned years in advance. Right? I got this other article here from the Washington Free Beacon, Back to gas. School districts revert to diesel because Biden's electric school buses can't be repaired. Now, this is politically charged a little bit, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this is actually happening. Lion Electric, which received $159 million in federal funds to manufacture electric buses. This is a Lion's company. I guess it's a Canadian company, but anyways, they received $159 million in federal funds to manufacture electric school buses, has fallen into bankruptcy and failed to deliver $95 million worth of buses. This kind of same shit happened with Solar City. It's happened with solar panel things and different programs all over. But anyways, we've got, let's see, the Washington Free Beacon, in this article, this one just came out in August 2025. I'm going to have to wait for that. I'm going to have to wait for to answer that phone call, I guess. The Washington, it just came out in August, just like last week, okay? Electric school buses revert back to diesel. This story's crazy. The Washington Free Beacon reported earlier this year that Lion, then nearing bankruptcy, had yet to deliver $95 million worth of the electric buses it pledged to produce as part of the Biden administration's $5 billion clean school bus program. Since then, Lion was sold for just $6 million during bankruptcy proceedings after being valued at $4.7 billion as recently as June 2021. The company also permanently shuttered multiple manufacturing plants, fired the majority of its employees. A lot of these jobs are saying, well, we're going to guarantee so many jobs. We're going to get into that a little bit too here in a minute, and that scam. But it fired all of its employees and told consumers that it could no longer honor the warranties and purchase orders in the United States. All of our contracts from Lion that we work so hard and closely with to ensure the project's success have been fired. All of our contacts from Lion that we work so closely with to ensure the project's success have been fired. Said the superintendent of Homer Community School District in southern Michigan. He told the Free Beacon, we are going to keep our electric fleet on the road as long as possible. Eventually, however, we will return to diesel as the cost of the vehicle is far less than electric. That's crazy, right? He said the district received $2.8 million. The one district received $2.8 million in federal funding to procure seven buses in 2022. Added that the Homer schools have started sourcing their own parts to repair the buses. The 14 buses his district received are still new. They're still new, but that he is struggling to find companies that can repair them. This is the kind of shit. This is the shit that central planned economies do. You know, this is the shit that central planning and centralized socialized economy does. That's where we're at. But we were up here. Why the long wait? Why the long wait for these solar and wind projects? Okay, we're kind of going to get into that a little bit. I also, number two, that was the first reason, the electrification of everything, and kind of a little side note in there on how the electrification of everything is kind of being thrown back in their face that they don't care. They don't care. They're not going to take a burn. They're just going to keep pushing like D9s unless the people wake up and push back against the politics. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But as long as the people are stupid, they're going to keep rolling over us. And they're playing us for stupid on a multitude of levels. They're all gas and their solar and wind are cheaper. All right. The second reason that we have such long wait lines to interconnect into these grid queues, right? 2. The centralized technocratic social science of world socialism's anthropogenic global warming driven mandatory elimination of the relatively few efficient generators of power, fossil fuel, coal, gas, whatever, right? It only takes there's relatively few of them to power. If you're going to replace any of these generators, fossil fuel generators that are being phased out under mandate, then to replace them, that one grid connection that was there, you're going to need a multitude of connections to replace that when it comes to wind and solar, because they just don't produce it unless you're going to cover literally square miles of territory with these things. And then you're going to have freaking connections, multiple connections for it. That's one of the reasons, They're all scrambling for their place in line to be connected to the grid. It's been shown that it takes hundreds, if not thousands, of windmills to replace standard fossil fuel or even nuclear-powered generators. And we're going to get into that a little bit, too. Not to mention millions of solar panels covering square miles of territory, mostly on our farmlands, where we grow our food, right? And we're going to get into a little bit more on the breakdown on how many windmills and solar panels it takes, and to get an idea how much land it takes. I think I just saw. We're going to get into it. 3. The third reason that we have these solar panels and windmills waiting in line for years and years, and up to a decade in some instances, just to be connected to the grid. The ever-increasing energy demand for a multitude of reasons, from the electrification of everything that we just went over in policies of net zero to the infusion of power-hungry AI, right? I mean, and it's not just the Democrats, it's not just the left. As I went over in the part 1 there of this, the Trump administration has got this AI policy that they just put out there. So it's an AI. I wanted to kind of show you this. I came across this. I just Googled this freaking shit, and I couldn't believe what I saw. I Googled, I don't know, the EPA is not, that the EPA just came out recently saying that, carbon emissions, even our own EPA is now saying that carbon emissions aren't causing emissions, that carbon emissions aren't dangerous. Okay, even EPA is saying that. So I Google it just to see what's going on. Of course, you get headlines coming up here. The EPA says power plant carbon emissions aren't dangerous. EPA says power plant carbon emissions aren't dangerous. There's a headline here. There's a headline. This, you can't see the whole thing, but that's the same headline there. And then right at the top of the page, when I Google that, I'll show you. Let me see. I got a screenshot of it just in case. And you can see EPA. Here's the articles. EPA says power plant carbon emissions aren't dangerous. And there's a whole slew of these freaking articles that all play off the same news thing. They all go in there, and they're basically the same article, at least with the same title, mostly the same article. It's crazy, right? But an AI, we're talking about the power demand the AI is going to have, and it's an AI, I just want to point out, it's an AI that will lie right through its teeth, right to your face. If it has teeth, it'll lie right to your face, because the AI isn't going to be an objective AI. It's going to be an AI that's trained to AI according to how its programmers have trained it to AI. So, no, it says the EPA did not say the carbon plant emissions aren't dangerous. The EPA did not say the carbon plant emissions aren't dangerous. And you go down here, EPA says power plant carbon emissions aren't. Scientists, EPA carbon emissions proposal is, EPA says power plant carbon emissions aren't dangerous. The AP says that, even. Of course, then they're going to ask 30 scientists. We're going to ask 30 scientists to see what they think. Do they ask 30 scientists or 30 doctors to see what they think when the FDA or the CDC mandated that doctors push for vaccine uptake with or as their first priority, to leverage their trust that people hold in them, to leverage their trust for maximum vaccine uptake as their first priority as doctors? Did they ask 30 doctors to see what they thought about that? I don't know. I'm just asking. But yeah, so they asked these 30 doctors or 30 scientists. EPA. Let me see. Yeah, we asked. It's the same title on a lot of these articles too, right? EPA says power plant carbon emissions aren't dangerous. So AI just lied right through its teeth, right there, right with those articles. The titles of those articles right there by it. I'm just saying, you got to be careful. I saw where lawyers are getting in trouble because to present evidence as their case or whatever in these courts, lawyers have tried using AI or didn't do the homework when AI popped things up for them. It was coming up with cases that didn't exist. That never existed, and the lawyers were presenting it. I covered it in one of the shows I just did not too long ago. One of my recent shows. Can't remember which one. But anyways. Yeah, so that AI, I wouldn't be dependent on it. As a matter of fact, use it as a joke. But know that they are bringing the guardrails in. They're bringing the guardrails in closer and closer and closer on what information we're going to be allowed. What information is going to be put in front of us. This AI isn't to put objective to something to look up information objectively. It's putting the information in front of you that they want in front of you. And it will lie through its teeth. It's smart freaking AI teeth and tell you that what you're looking for doesn't exist, even if it does. I'm telling you. And these 30 scientists, they got like 19 of these scientists. They got like 19 of these scientists to disagree with that, they said. But the rest of them must not have agreed with it. But how many of those 19, just to kind of put it out there, how many of those 19 scientists that disagreed with the EPA on this would have been fired or lost funding if they agreed with it? Just throwing that out there, right? Because we all know science is bullshit and depends on the funding. A lot of it. I mean, Harvard put out a study, a white paper, not how many years ago, back in the 90s maybe, that some 90-some percent, 90 to 95% of all published science is bullshit, biased. It is what it is. So we're left with bullshit science to counter bullshit science. If you want to believe in science, that's where we are. But anyways, I got that right there. And also what I want to do, I had a note on here. The same title in this article ran across a multitude of media worldwide. Basically, it's a Uninews worldwide with only 19 of the 30 scientists disagreeing. And I asked how many of them would have lost funding or gotten fired if they actually agreed. And I just wanted to put a shout out to Climate Realism. The Climate Realism is the show. I've been kind of keeping an eye on these guys, and they put out a show once a week. They're affiliated with the Heartland Institute, I guess, one of the think tanks that they're kind of associated with, a couple other websites or whatever, but these guys, I've been watching them for a while. They put a lot of information out there regarding the climate change, kind of a they go into it a little bit on the science, because you have some scientists involved with it, geologists involved with it, whatever, and then they put stories out, keep track of the bullshit, stories out there, and how some of these scams, like that school bus story, and some of the other stuff that I just went over here, school buses, and yeah. And that the EPA coming out saying that even our own EPA now saying that the whole freaking carbon emission shit's bullshit. And the EPA was basically saying the same thing back in 2017. They were saying the same thing back in 2017. But anyways, I want to put a shout out to Climate Realism guys over at Climate Realism for that information and for putting those stories and that news out there. And 4, why are these windmills and solar panels waiting in line so long, years, right? Waiting to get connected to the grid. The fourth reason, the inadequate, inefficient, intermittent nature of wind and solar are incompatible with the grid that we've had here for a long time, that has served us just fine and could have been more than adequate to bring us much more power if we didn't have the influx of all these intermittent, insufficient generators from solar and wind mills, right? It's just crazy because there's so many more of them that need to be put in service to replace that one grid connection. They're incompatible with the grid without multitude of updates, which is billions of dollars in updates, if not more, in battery storage and upgrades like that. There will nevertheless even whole transmission lines, to take all this renewable power and everything, like down to New York City. In New York's case, I mean, a lot of the power from up in upstate New York gets put on transmission lines and gets sent down to New York City, or at least that's what the kind of the scuttlebutt is on that. You see, I don't see any evidence against that, but anyways, that's the kind of the story, is that most of it's getting put downstate. Most all of it's getting put downstate on these transmission lines, and they need more and more of these transmission lines, and they need more and more of these transmission lines just to hook up all these individual little solar panel and windmill projects. And they just had that huge one. I kind of touched on it on the last part 1 of this series a little bit. They had that transmission line down that was going to New York City that just folded. They backed out. The costs of it were extramentally increasing to the point where they just had to back out. Inflation. That is, for a great part, being caused by all the money being spent on the projects that these guys are doing. Being spent on all these freaking net zero projects, that are being spent on all these renewable projects, that are being spent on all these solar and wind freaking projects. They're spending us into oblivion, and they don't care. And it's the objective. I'll put it out there that it's the objective of the Keynesian economics driving all of it. The world socialism of Keynesian economics. That's at the heart of it. It's being done with intention. It's not a mistake. Yeah. So they're spending billions on battery storage and upgrades that will nevertheless, even with batteries, never be able to, that these new renewables will never be able to meet the increasing demand without being subsidized by some other form of energy production, be it fossil fuels or nuclear. They can't possibly produce the energy, that they're calling for. Not even today. Not even mentioning or considering the exponential increase in power demand they're going to need when all these AI data centers come in. And And I got regarding nuclear on a side note here. I got nuclear. The whole nuclear aspect of nuclear energy should be something that needs to be taken into consideration, needs to be considered deeper by people. Dig into it a little bit and see what's going on here, because there's some nefarities going on with that. And Mark Kulak over at Housatonic, I got a couple shows here. So regarding nuclear, Mark of Housatonic has looked into some of the narratives and potential scams surrounding nuclear power that also ties into the same world collectivism and technocratic centralization of everything from COVID, climate change, and criminal justice reform to the whole of science itself. Literally, science itself has been centralized. socialized and centralized. The hierarchy of science, as I've gone into on another show, part of the Enlightenment, the centralization of science under the hierarchy of science as put forth through, as established by Auguste Comte's sociology. Sociology is what takes the centralization of science, puts sociology, the socialization of science, as the queen of all sciences, where central planners can take the data of the science, whatever that science is being put out, and they can reinterpret it however they want, and they can utilize whatever the data or the findings of these science, of all fields of science, whether it's math, whether it's geology, whether it's biology, doesn't matter, and they can kind of funnel it down through and screen it out and filter it down through to take what they want to utilize however best they see fit to best push the evolution of mankind towards that single global human organism, towards the final objective of collectivism as a single global human organism. That's what it is. That's what world collectivism is. The ultimate end. It all ties in here. But Mark has taken, he's done dug into this freaking nuclear thing. Let me see. He's posted some really interesting info on a number of shows and subjects, including but not limited to this show here. He does the revival of nuclear power human genome project. It ties into that. Enriched uranium for future data centers. I watch that show. You should. I recommend that you watch his shows and several of them. This is another one here. The Big Lie About Nuclear Waste by Cleo Abram. He just kind of reposted this. But she goes into the recycling, how nuclear power isn't being recycling. Our technology, the way we've been doing our nuclear waste is like taking some 200,000 years or hundreds of thousands of years that it's going to be radioactive, and they're saying that they're burying all this stuff in all these places. And then they got concrete kiosks or whatever they are that they're storing the stuff, and it's only designed to last 60, 70 years above ground. How does that make sense? But, what she gets into here and kind of points out is that the technology has been around since the 1950s to recycle the nuclear waste and utilize that nuclear waste to bring it down so that the nuclear waste left over from the recycled nuclear waste is only going to be radioactive for decades, not hundreds of thousands of years. Why aren't we doing that? And it's been around since the 1950s. The technology to do that's been around since the 1950s. There's places in Europe, France, I guess, is one of them. But there's places around the world that are utilizing the recyclability, the recycled nuclear waste to produce energy. Why are we still? Why are they even still using waste that's supposed to be radioactive for 200,000 years? I don't know. And a lot of questions could be raised on that nuclear waste, and the potential for what they're setting the people up. My observation on it is that they're setting the people up for an energy grid with this wind and solar that will limit the amount of electric and power that will go to the people themselves. Meanwhile, the central planners with all their data, storage banks and everything else that they're going to have, the AI that they're going to have to centralize everything and be able to, engineer society in every minute of our life. They're going to be powered with unlimited power of nuclear power, be it recycled or not recycled. But there's some things to take into consideration on that. Mark kind of dives into that few nefarities that might be going on involved with that, and I thought maybe if I show you a couple of shows that you can dig into on this whole nuclear tangent off of this, because New York State has just re-implemented HOCL. They know They know that these renewables in no way can produce the energy that they're saying they're going to be able to produce. Right? So all of a sudden, within the past few months, Hochul's like, oh, we're going to go nuclear. We're going to go nuclear. Right? All of a sudden, they're going to go nuclear. The Supreme Court ruling on spent nuclear fuel storage in New Mexico and Texas, AI data centers. Mark gets into all kinds of different things on these shows. I highly recommend that if that kind of thing interests you, and it should interest us all, check his shows out, check his information. He's got a lot of information. He does a lot of good research. Probably one of the best guys out there as far as finding research data on a number of issues and subjects that are related to the threat on our liberty and our republic. That's how I see it. For instance, per the Michigan Capital Confidential, it will take 3,269 windmills. Oh, let me see. That's what I'm saying. I'm getting in here that's on the nuclear. Mark gets into that. You gotta watch this shit. It's pretty good. At 4, I got this. They're going to take a multitude of wind and solar projects to replace one connection. Okay, and here's where we get into some numbers. For instance, the Michigan Capital Confidential. All right, Michigan Capital. This CapCon is this Capital Confidential. It will take some 3,269 windmills, like the ones they already had in 2019, to replace the one coal or gas-fired plant, which is the Dan E. Carn Generation Plant in Bay County, Michigan, that's scheduled to be shut down in 2032. All right. This is that article right here, CapCon. Doubling states 1,100 windmills won't replace this one coal gas plant. This is one of the reasons why they're waiting so long to be connected to the grid, because it takes so frickin' many of them to replace one fossil fuel or nuclear power plant. It says, be advised, this Michigan Capital Confidential is the news source produced by the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, and Michigan Capital Confidential, again, allegedly reports with a free market news perspective, and so that would be considered from the right. You know, just so that you know what that source is. I mean, a lot of the sources, if not most of the great majority of the sources that I'm showing you here aren't from the right, aren't from the opposition, aren't from the deniers. They're from the frickin' Kool-Aid swizzlers themselves. But in this case, I want to point it out that it would be technically, I guess, from the right or whatever. So, but I wanted to show you that. See also, Climate Portal, okay? This is from MIT. Ask MIT Climate. How many wind turbines would it take to equal the energy output of one typical nuclear reactor? Let me see. Yeah, that article from CapCon is here. If you want to check that out, it's a pretty good article. Yeah, over 3,000 windmills to replace one, but that's, I don't know if that takes into consideration the batteries needed or not, because that's crazy. How many turbines would it take to equal one energy output of one typical nuclear reactor? This just came out just in January 24. Nearly 800 of today's average size land-based windmills, or put in other ways, 8.5 million solar panels. 8.5 million solar panels. Let that sink in for a minute. 800 average windmills are 8.5 million solar panels. Yeah. Once a nuclear plant is powered on, it runs at its top performance the majority of the time. 93% of the time, so it's 93% efficient. in the U.S. according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. That's significantly higher than the capacity factor for even coal or natural gas, generally considered reliable base load sources we can count on whenever we need them. They're producing the energy all the time. You know, a little less susceptible to brownouts due to too much power being demanded when not enough power was being made. Right. Wind, on the other hand, has a capacity factor of around 36%, so it's 36% efficient. That's when the wind's blowing at the proper speed, and as long as it's, you know, as long as there is wind blowing or not blowing too hard, because then they'll have to shut it down if the wind's blowing too hard too, right? When it comes to land use, nuclear plants take up as little as 10 hectares, and each hectare is approximately 2.5 acres per terawatt hour of electricity produced per year, while wind uses about 100 hectares, which would be 250 acres. Measuring just the area taken by the turbines themselves, not the square miles of territory between them, right? Shit you not. Yeah. This rises to an astounding 10,000 hectares, which would be, 25,000 acres? I don't even know how many acres are in a square mile. I'm going to figure that out here real quick. Let's see what I come up with. $640 acres in a square mile. So you'd have to divide that by 640. 25,000 divided by 640. Is it right? 25,000? Yeah, 25,000 divided by 39 square miles. I don't know if my math is right. Don't take my word on that. Figure it out for yourself. It's a lot, you know. But anyways, when it comes to land use, nuclear power plants take up as little as 10 hectares. You're looking at 10,000 hectares, which is 25, 2.5 times, that would be 25,000 acres, if you include the land that's covered by the wind farm. In terms of land, a solar plant can use more than 1,000 hectares per terawatt hour of electricity produced per year, roughly 10 times as much as wind. And solar energy has a lower capacity factor than wind, about 24%. Producing the same amount of electricity as the average nuclear reactor using solar panels would require 8.5 million solar panels. However, I looked into this a little bit. Being solar panels have also been said to be only 15 to 22% efficient. You got to remember, this is saying that they're 24% efficient. Yeah, 24%. There's also they've been also said to be only 15%. That would increase the number of solar panels above by somewhere between 3 and 9%, right? So the difference would be adding 3 or 9%, adding the need for an additional 765,000 plus or minus solar panels to that 8.5 million. This is from Solar Plus. Just to tell you, I'm not making this shit up. Right? Key takeaway: an acre of solar panels can power 37 to 38 homes. Where are we? Oh, efficiency. Average efficiency ratings for solar panels: 15% efficiency. 15% efficiency. There's 22% is converted into electricity. Up to 22%. So it's saying 15 up to 22%. But anyways, so that 1,250 acres that would take to make it some 6,800 acres. That's 1,200 acres for those solar panels. It would take some 6,800 acres of solar panels plus the 612 more acres needed for the additional 765,000 solar. The solar pluses numbers put us at needing, say that will be needed, equals 7,412 acres of solar panels for each typical nuclear power plant on about 25 acres. I kind of dove into this a little bit and took all these numbers here that they're giving us. And this, again, comes out of MIT. These numbers come out of MIT. Let's see if it's going to go. I don't know why it's not going to go, but I guess it's... We'll see what happens here. But yeah, those numbers come out. There it goes. I don't know what happened. Might be a solar flare or something happening here. It doesn't want to come in. Come on. I ain't waiting around. Anyways, it doesn't want to come in for some reason. But that comes out of MIT, the climate portal. They're saying that solar panels are 24%. Solar Plus says most solar panels today have efficiency ratings between 15 and 22%. An acre can hold about 1,000 to 1,500 solar panels. Okay, that's the number. So 1,000 to 1,500. So if we took the middle number between that, would be 1,250. So at 1,250 per acre, that would make it some 6,800 acres of solar panels plus the 612 more acres needed for the additional 765,000 solar panels. The 15% efficiency over the 24% efficiency would put the need at. And check my numbers, but that would be needed at approximately 7,412 acres of solar panels for each typical nuclear power plant that will be running on approximately 25 acres. Eat that ground up, man. Spend that freaking money. So this reminds me of back in the 60s, there was the domestic terrorist organization Weather Underground. The Maoist communist, well, the Black Panthers were Maoist communist, the Weather Underground was Maoist communist, and there had another organization that was called MIM Prisons, which is Maoist International Movement. MIM Prisons was also had a tie-off organization called Fire to the Prisons, all abolitionist, abolish all prisons anarchy, that is kind of filtered down from Emma Goldman's Abolish All Prisons, which is basically behind all the it's become mainstream. It's become mainstream in today's contemporary criminal justice reform. I shit you not. But I've gone over it in my other shows. But that's what we have here. And what they had a policy, they talked about a policy which they called 1, 2, 3 many Vietnams back in the day, in the 60s, right? They called it 1, 2, 3 many Vietnams, and what their target was to involve law enforcement, was to involve our military and law enforcement domestically in as many altercations, and spread them out thin, and basically make it so that they couldn't finance it to spend us into oblivion. And the other thing was to keep our military active around the world in as many locations as possible to, again, stretch us thin and spend as much of our money as possible to, again, ultimate objective, spend us into oblivion. There was a policy, or it was not a policy, but it was a vanguard maneuver that they referred to as 1, 2, 3 many Vietnams. I shit you not. And this is what they're doing. This is just another aspect, another attempt by the same revolutionary world collectivism that has targeted our republic and our limited form of government and our individual rights and liberty for destruction. This is just another avenue that they're doing it. And see it. It's all the same shit. It's all the same malevolent show. As Jay Couey says. Right? As Dr. Couey says. Again, the connection is made. The same strands in the same web are coming back around and around and around. It's all the same. It's all the same collectivism. But this gives you some numbers, gives you an idea what we're talking about. The colossal freaking footprint, the bootprint that they're putting on our back with this shit. You know, it's crazy. Meanwhile, it's been announced, okay, that New York offers $12 million for grid enhancements to support renewables. $12 million. This was just in April of 2025. They had all these grid updates and everything that everybody, all these, they're waiting in line to get connected to the grid. Then they're being told that, well, the 2 or 3 million that you paid now is going to cost you 30 or 40 or 45 million, and you have to do all these upgrades. And now they're getting grants and funding to do the upgrades, okay, that are being mandated. This article, it comes out of it comes out of right here. New York offers 12 million for grid enhancements. NYSERDA, which is the New York State agency that's funding all this shit, okay, pushing Hochul's net zero, pushing whatever progressive policies that the progressive government of New York State is pushing. This is where they funnel a lot of the funding through. NYSERDA president and NYSERDA president and CEO Doreen Harris said that the funding will foster public-private partnerships. Again, public-private partnerships. And the public-private partnerships that we have again shown over and over again have been operated and defined by Mussolini himself as fascism. It's just a historical fact. It's a reality. And you have these lefties pushing the fascism of these public-private partnerships, which are being pushed on a global scale by the World Economic Forum, right? They're all tied into the World Economic Forum. They're the profiting corporations that all the lefties pushing the programs that they're pushing say they hate, yet they're pushing their programs. I ain't saying, I'm just saying. You know what I'm saying? But that's just it. Yeah, the New York State policy is to push for more public-private partnerships. You know, just like Dr. Pierre Corey wants more public-private partnerships. Another priority area is the integration of solar panels, wind turbines, and battery storage systems, because they need the batteries. They're intermittent. They can't produce the power, so they have to come up with a way to store the power they are producing when they are producing, so that power won't be available when they're not producing, which adds to the cost exponentially. I mean, I think if we're going to pick a word out of all these shows, it's going to be exponentially. I don't know. It's the power word of the day of the series, I guess. But, yeah, they need these battery systems to convert electricity between DC and AC power. This includes technologies that maintain grid stability when renewable energy output fluctuates due to its inadequacy of its intermittency. The funding initiative builds on prior rounds of programs formerly called the Future Grid Challenge, which has awarded approximately $65 million to over 110 grid technology companies, and research organizations since 2016. The program I wonder how many went bankrupt. Have since gone bankrupt. The program was delivered in collaboration with the Joint Utilities of New York, whose members include Con Edison, Central Hudson, Gas and Electric, National Grid, New York State Electric and Gas, Rochester Gas and Electric, and Orange and Rockland. I don't know, they're owned by some company in Denmark or Europe somewhere too. Now they're all global. Well, maybe not all global, and I know NYSEG is. The latest funding rounds aligns with New York's broader climate goals, which call for complete transition to emissions-free electricity by 2040 and a carbon-neutral economy by 2050. Carbon neutral. We got to have that carbon neutrality, man. You know? Which the EPA just said isn't dangerous anyways. Again. All right, which they just said again that isn't dangerous anyways. But yeah. The state has committed to deploying approximately $1.2 billion over 15 years for clean energy innovation and research, with more than $800 million already invested to support over 700 companies. I wonder how many have gone bankrupt or will go bankrupt, and bring nearly 300 products to market. It uses the word market. They use the word market. There is no market for any of this shit. It's all mandated. That's what a market is. A market doesn't supply anything. A market, the market demands people in business meet the demand. They create supplies to meet the demand. The market demands. The market is a free people voting with their dollars. A real free market, an actual market, free market, is people voting with their dollars on the value and need for things, on the need and therefore the value of it. And price can fluctuate according to demand or whatever. People will pay a premium for things that they feel are worth the premium paid. Value goes up, supply and demand has effect, and all these different things. So Adam Smith got into effect that. Adam Smith didn't invent capitalism. He was just explaining how things work in that free market system. You can't, but anyways, this is where we are. Count the money. Count the ways they're spending us into oblivion. The times that they're spending us into oblivion. And I'm only touching. This is just the tip of the proverbial freaking iceberg on this shit. It's wholly coercive, centrally planned, and mandated world socialist-oriented fascistic market. This is what I'm pointing out. It's not a market. It's the mandate and compliance to the mandate. It's not a market. Grid Forward Summit 2021 overview of the federal legislation impacting the grid. This article is it's Vimeo. It's got videos. I want to show you some of this shit. I checked out some of the videos on here. Welcome to overview of federal legislation. And these guys, these are the planners. These are the people that every time there's a government funding or a grant program, I'm watching a hummingbird right now outside my window. It's freaking cool. But they got whenever there's funding, grant programs put out, you'll have a whole slew of people that get together to figure out, what are we going to do with this money, and how much Kool-Aid, where do we got to drink and show that we're drinking what Kool-Aid to get this money, and how much, want to show that we're drinking Kool-Aid here to get this money out. It's crazy, right? And I kind of wanted to go down through here a little bit and show you some of the different videos that they're showing. Federal legislation moves impact of the tax incentive. Just the importance of public-private partnerships, blah, 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 blah. So this is from that organization. And I wanted to say the House and Senate have passed Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that puts $1.2 trillion this is something back in 2021. Puts $1.2 trillion of resources in motion to support critical infrastructure across the country. Included in the package is about $100 billion of funding to capabilities of the grid and energy systems. Leaders on the front line of this package will share an overview of the key pieces of this legislation for advancing our grid. Like I said, they're going to get together and they're going to say, leaders on the front line of this package, okay, will share an overview of the key pieces of this legislation for advancing our grid. A number of videos from the perspective of the laser-focused, gung-ho, words actually used in these videos, because I watched a few of them, central planning players leveraging the necessary fascism of global public-private partnerships academia, and the grid as a platform. They're leveraging academia, they're leveraging public-private partnerships, academia, and the grid as a platform for equitable social change, forcing DEI and ESG compliance, decarbonization, utilizing buku government funding to make it happen while keeping things profitable for their public-private partner stakeholders, are available here to watch, including these couple videos here in particular that I watched. Man, these guys, you wanna hear what it sounds like from the people that are licking their chops at all this freaking money, that are freaking reaping in the benefits of these, and how they're planning to use our great grandchildren's inheritance of the country that they were to inherit. It's crazy. Importance of public-private partnerships. Again, the importance of the fascism of public-private partnerships being put out there as an innovation. They want to accelerate the innovation of that fascism. Yeah. I watched that video. I watched it. I wanted to vomit a bunch of times through it. And this one right here shows where they drinking the Kool-Aid, and they kind of beat around the bush a little bit. I know it's coming. I'm reading this transformation to an integrated grid, and I'm seeing it, and I'm going to say this is where they're going to get into the whole DEI, ESG, and inclusion, and equity, and all that, all the redistributive justice stuff that comes out of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which came from the what were they called before? They were called United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were the Millennial Development Goals. Before that, they were called the Millennial Development Goals, I'm pretty sure. And they were put together for the United Nations by Jeffrey Sachs and Sasha Stone working together. They worked together to create that. The same Sasha Stone that all the medical freedom people, doctors, not all of them, but a lot of them that I showed on a couple different shows, deciphering the collectivism of the Christed collectivism of Sasha Stone, and there's a couple videos I actually did with this guy. He's medical freedom guru, Sherry Tenpenny, all of them. Even Dr. McCullough was on there. Steve Kirsch was involved with that. Naomi Wolf was involved with that. G. Edward Griffin was involved with that. You've got, and I can go right on down the line. There isn't hardly anybody that's involved with the medical freedom movement, the fake medical freedom movement, that wasn't involved with Sasha Stone and the International Tribunal for International Justice or some shit that they all signed in blood. I didn't know that was all signed in blood. Yeah, crazy shit. The anarchy of those people that actually come out and they're saying that they're against not just the United States government, but they're against all the governments of the world. I shit you not. You should check them shows out. But again, it all ties in. It's all the same circle. It's all the same show. It's all the same malevolent show. It's all the same strands of the same web coming back around and around. Yeah, interesting show. You should watch that. Again, you got U.S. Energy and Grid Resilience Innovation Partnership GRIP program. Again, we're just kind of keeping track here a little bit of some of the money and the money that's being spent. Okay, the money that's being spent on all these windmills, these solar panels and windmills, and the grid updates and infrastructure for the grid that needs to change, and the investments into it to make it compatible to solar and wind. It's nuts, right? So this is what we're getting into here. In the U.S. Department of Energy, Grid Resilience Innovation Partnerships, the GRIP program. Get a grip, man. This comes out, when was this? 2024, as of 2024 is this chart here. But they put the Grid Deployment Office is administering a $10.5 billion Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership Program. Innovation and Partnerships Program. The innovation of public-private partnership. The innovation of the fascism. Global fascism of public-private partnerships. The innovation of that shit. It's right there. Yeah. Another $10.5 billion being thrown in this from a different source. Count the money that they're spending us into oblivion with. Again, spending us into oblivion. Remember the 1, 2, 3 many Vietnams. They couldn't touch the money that they're spending on this. They couldn't touch. That would be kind of see side by side. How much money did they spend, on 3 Vietnams versus what they're spending on this shit? These programs will accelerate the deployment of transformative projects that will help to ensure the reliability of power sector's infrastructure so all American communities have access to affordable, reliable electricity. The two things that solar and wind aren't. Crazy, right? Crazy shit. Grid Resilience Innovation Partnership Program selection snapshot. Total federal investment $7.6 billion. Total projects selected 105. Miles of transmission affected 2,500 miles. Jobs supported or created. They say they're going to make 15,000 jobs. They say they're going to create 15,000 jobs. What's 15,000 divided by 10.5 billion? How much per job does that come out to? My calculator doesn't have enough zeros to figure that shit out. 85 million estimated number of customers impacted. How many people will be impacted by this shit when you figure the freaking, plethora of generations affected by the inflation that they're causing us when they're freaking driving us into oblivion and causing our economy to crash and our dollar to crash and spending it into worthlessness. What kind of chaos comes out of that? And how many people are going to be affected by that intergenerationally, in perpetuity? Would we ever be able to recover? Just asking. The global grid scam. S&P Global. U.S. renewable energy credit market size to market. U.S. renewable energy credit market size to double to $26 billion by 2030. Now, we're going to be getting into this renewable energy credit shit. I'm going to start going over some of that and the scam of just those credits alone. It's crazy. But this was from 2022, okay? Gives us an idea going back. The REC market as of 2021 was estimated to be $11.45 billion. Now, these RECs, these renewable energy credits, and just really quick off the top as we get into this, what these renewable energy credits are. These solar panel projects and windmill projects, they make electricity, and when they put that electricity on the grid, people can buy it, and you can buy that electricity, and you can have your own solar panel power source, and maybe your own solar panel power source if you're a business or a big corporation to power your needs, and use that energy to say that you're carbon neutral, or your emission, you're meeting net zero standard compliances, mandatory compliance, that you're compliant to the mandate. And you can show that you're compliant using actual solar or wind energy. Or here's where the bullshit scam comes in. Not only do they produce energy, the government, way back, but I know starting in 2015, they've had new policies that kind of freaking bring this REC, what they call a REC program or innovation, okay? Where these renewable energy credits that companies can buy. So I could be a company that's running 100% on coal or gas or whatever, and as long as I pay that bill, and then I go to an a solar or windmill project, and they have RECs for sale, because for each megawatt hour or whatever, there's equal the energy that they put onto the grid. For the equal amount of energy that they put onto the grid, kilowatt hours, however they're measuring it, I can buy a amount of kilowatt hours that equal the kilowatt hours that my company has used from coal. If I buy that equal amount of credit from a wind or solar, then I own the credits, which is the social environmental value of the electricity they put on the grid. That grid goes on the electricity where they sell it to somebody else, but now you're buying the social. It's like a carbon credit score. It's all redistribution wealth mandates. It's all redistribution of wealth mandate shit, you know? So I can buy, as long as, say I use 10 megawatts of power or whatever, I can buy 10 megawatts of power from a solar or windmill project. I can buy the equal amount of megawatt power credits and say, I'm 100% efficient. I'm carbon neutral, and I've used I'm powering on. I'm 100% renewable. I shit you not. That's the freaking scam. That's a scam that I never really dove into. I never really looked into it, but that's the bullshit that's going on. And I'm going to go down through some of this shit. So this is when you see that REC. This is what we're getting into. Okay, the REC market. Companies, and they're all there's a voluntary market, then there's a mandate market. The vast majority of the RECs being bought and sold are by companies that are being mandated to meet these standards, these net zero standards, these carbon neutral standards. The REC market as of 2021 was estimated at $11.45 billion, with the compliance market making up 95% of that value. Like I said, the S&P Global Market Intelligence Power Forecast projects the REC market to more than double to $26.5 billion by 2030. This was back in 2022, so it's going to be more than that. While the compliance market remains dominant, its share over the voluntary market is expected to shrink by 76%. But while the compliance market remains dominant, its share over the voluntary market is expected to shrink by 76%. There's your freaking, that's bullshit, because that's your relative risk reduction shit right there. By the end of the decade, the solar carve-out is forecast to slowly grow from $3.2 billion in the solar carve-out is forecast to slowly grow from $3.2 billion in 2022 to $3.6 billion by 2030. Driven by robust offshore REC prices, the offshore wind REC market should explode from almost non-existent to nearly $3.6 billion by 2030. That's $26 billion, I'd like to point out, in REC punk dues. It's punk dues that these companies are going to have to pay to play. They're punk dues. Pay them up. They're being shaken down. They're being shaken down. I'm going to have to probably cut this short here pretty minute, because I got some guys coming over. We're going to do some shooting today. So that's $26 billion in REC punk dues, in recreational energy credit punk dues that these guys have to pay, despite RECs having been shown to have no equal or actual or significant effect on emissions reductions. This is a white paper. Does the purchase of voluntary renewable energy certificates lead to emission reductions? A review of studies quantifying the impact. And you can check that study out for that. Okay, you think this is unhinged progressive spending spree isn't going to have a direct effect on us, like I've been saying over and over again? If not the outright cause of, it's going to have effect on, if not the outright cause of, an exponentially expanding and potentially permanent inflation, by which the value of the dollar in the paychecks and pockets of every American continues to go down, down, down in a death spiral in perpetuity. You know? While the wait for connections to the grid steadily closes in on the better part of a decade for industrial solar and wind, by the time they're actually up and running, their 20 to 25 year lifespan, and 15 years in some cases, have been well eaten into without anything being produced except maybe a few extremely expensive union construction jobs, prevailing wage, right? And the course colossal intergenerational industrial eyesores. Furthermore, given their inadequate and intermittent nature, the industrial sprawl consuming square miles of precious farmland and once pristine rural vistas they occupy, and the relatively low impact of innovations such as the recently imposed additional political mandate of nuclear option. Again, check out Mark Kulak at Housatonic. He dives into some really interesting aspects and nefarities that have been going on with the whole nuclear narrative. One reason why that they need for an exponential... let me see. Sorry about that. In New York State, despite the fact that even NASA has massive plumes of steam and water vapor that they put out as already being Earth's most abundant greenhouse gas. Oh yeah, nuclear power. Sorry about that. That sentence got cut off. Furthermore, given their inadequate and intermittent nature, industrial sprawl consuming square miles of precious farmland and once pristine rural vistas they occupy, and the relatively low impact of the innovations such as recently imposed additional political mandate of the nuclear option, yeah, Hochschule nuclear, in New York State, despite the fact that even NASA has the massive plumes of steam water vapor that come out of those nuclear power plants they put out, and actually a lot of them, that's what they do, they're steam power, there's steam coming out of them all, right? They put out is already NASA puts out that water vapor is already the Earth's most abundant greenhouse gas. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Steamy relationships, how atmospheric water vapor amplifies Earth's greenhouse effect. They say that it's the world's most popular, their abundant greenhouse gas, and then they back off it by saying, well, it doesn't directly affect it, it indirectly affects it. But anyways, meanwhile, many of these colossal centrally planned fascistic, as we've gone over, public-private partnership government projects sit idly by waiting to be connected to the grid. As they do, wind and solar technology at large has and will continue to become more and more antiquated, unnecessary, and obsolete. This is where I'm going next. One reason why is the need for an exponential society-wide increase in the massive energy consumption of AI. This is where we're going to go next, but this obsolete thing is where I want to close this show here for this edition here, this part of the series. This whole, but these windmills and solar panels being made obsolete by going to nuclear option. They can't possibly produce the energy that's going to be needed. It can't be done. They can't put it out there without steadily. They're intermittent. It's insufficient. They can't put it out without consuming literally square miles of land and farmland. It's crazy. They're obsolete. If they're going to go nuclear, which the nuclear mandate is here in New York, or if not here officially, it's coming. They don't need these solar panels. They don't need the windmills, because the nuclear power plants, if they can get the technology down, if they can go back to the recycled ability of... I'm not advocating nuclear power. I'm not advocating anything. I'm just saying, if they're going to go nuclear, they don't need the solar panels and the windmills, because they can get more than enough energy from the nuclear and much smaller areas of land. They're going to go nuclear whether I advocate for or not, for or against them. But if they're going to go nuclear, at once, these solar panels and windmills have been made at once obsolete. The only thing that they're going to be here for is evidence that they've shit on us with their mandates. It's their bootprint, fascist bootprint from the left. Policies of the left leaving the fascist bootprint on the back of our republic. That's what these solar panels projects and windmill projects actually represent. There's no need for it other than just to leave their bootprint on our forehead, on our back, or on our nuts, right? I don't know. But thanks for stopping by the Liberty Perspective. I'm going to leave off here. I'm going to pick this up right here, okay? And how we're going to continue this on a little bit in our next show. Continue on in this a little bit here and get into some of the breakdown on these wrecks and some of the scam and how it's actually working and how these things are going to get into a little bit more of the details on that. And I look forward to it. I hope you got something out of this show today. And I look forward to seeing you on the next Liberty Perspective. I'm Joe Marshall. Thanks for stopping by and look forward to seeing you at the next show.